As a child, I always heard the strange noises coming from the old Victorian mansion at the end of the street. The creaking of the old floors, the squeaking of the doors, and the mysterious whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls. It was the kind of place that sent shivers down my spine, and I always tried to avoid it whenever possible. But as fate would have it, the house would become a part of my life once again. Years later, after the passing of my great-aunt, I received a letter informing me that she had left me her old Victorian mansion in her will. At first, I was hesitant to take on such a responsibility, but as I thought about it more, I realized that I couldn't resist the opportunity to live in such a grand historic home. The day I arrived at the mansion, I was greeted by its sprawling gardens, towering oak trees, and shadow-casting turrets. It was a sight to behold, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation for what lay ahead. As I began to explore the house, the same old noises that had haunted me as a child once again filled the air, but this time they seemed more intense and more ominous than I remembered. The first few weeks were filled with minor annoyances, sudden creaks and groans that I chalked up to the age of the home. But as time went on, I started to notice things that couldn't be explained by anything other than a paranormal presence. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find doors creaking open on their own or odd shadows moving in the corners of my vision. Sometimes I would hear disembodied whispers or see strange apparitions standing at the end of a darkened hallway. As the days went on, the activity only grew more intense. The voices became more frequent, and I could swear that I was being watched at every moment. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that I was imagining things, but eventually I could no longer deny the reality of what was happening in my own home. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an old journal hidden away in the attic that I began to understand the true horror of the place. The journal belonged to a former owner of the mansion, and as I read it, it became clear that the house had a dark, haunted past. The former owner, a wealthy businessman, had constructed the mansion in the late 1800s as a symbol of his wealth and status. But underneath the grand facade, the man was a monster who had committed unspeakable acts of violence and cruelty against his family and his servants. Over time, the spirits of his victims had come to inhabit the mansion, trapped within its walls and unable to escape. Their moans and whispers were the same ones that had haunted me as a child. And now, it seemed that they were seeking some sort of vengeance against the living. The more I delved into the history of the mansion, the more I realized the danger that I was in. The ghosts that haunted the place were not friendly spirits, but rather malevolent entities that wanted me gone. But despite the danger, I refused to leave. I knew that the mansion was my inheritance, my birthright, and more than that, I had come to feel a strange sense of attachment to the place. It was as though the horror that surrounded me had become a part of my very being. I spent months researching and experimenting with different methods of banishing the spirits from the house, but no matter what I tried, they always came back. It was as though they were growing more powerful, more determined to claim me as their own. In the end, I knew that there was only one way to break the curse of the mansion once and for all. I would have to face the ghosts head-on, confront them in their own domain, and either banish them or succumb to their power. On a dark and stormy night, I made my way down to the cellar of the mansion, armed with nothing more than a candle and my own determination. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could hear the ghostly whispers growing louder with each step I took. As I reached the center of the room, a cold blast of air washed over me, and the candles flickered ominously. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into physical form, and I found myself face to face with the ghosts of the mansion's former inhabitants. For a moment, I was terrified, frozen with fear, and uncertain of what to do. But then I remembered the words of my great-aunt, who had always told me that facing my fears was the only way to conquer them. With a deep breath, I stood my ground, holding out the candle like a shield against the angry spirits. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, fighting against the ghosts with all my willpower and determination. In the end, I emerged victorious. The ghosts slowly faded away into nothingness, leaving me alone in the darkened cellar. The air was still and silent, the only sound the sound of my own breath. As I emerged from the house, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time since I had inherited the mansion, I felt at peace, and I knew that my great-aunt would have been proud of me. From that day on, the noises and whispers that had once haunted me were gone forever. And though the mansion was still old and creaky, it was no longer haunted by evil spirits. Instead, it was filled with the voices of the past, echoes of a time long gone but never forgotten.